They called her the Ghost. Alara. A name whispered like a regret when it was spoken at all. Most of the time, she was just a flicker in the corner of an eye, a shadow that scrubbed floors and hauled water, her presence as thin and unwanted as the winter frost on a window pane. The cold was a constant companion, a lover with a cruel touch. It seeped through the worn leather of her boots and the threadbare wool of her cloak. It gnawed at her bones, a deep, relentless ache that started in her toes and worked its way up to her soul. Today, it was particularly vicious. The wind that swept down from the Dragon's Tooth Mountain sliced like claws, promising a storm that would bury the world in white. Her hands were raw, the skin split and bleeding around her knuckles. The wooden handle of the bucket was slick with ice, and each step from the river back to the pack house was a trial. Water sloshed over the rim, freezing instantly to her skirts, weighing her down. She was nothing, less than nothing. An Omega orphan, a remnant of a shamed bloodline, permitted to live on the fringes of the Silver Moon Pack out of a cruel sort of charity. It was a charity that demanded its price in humiliation. "Look at it," a voice sneered, sharp and brittle as ice. Lyra. Her golden hair was a stark, beautiful contrast to the gray misery of the day. She stood with her friends, all of them wrapped in thick, luxurious furs, their faces flushed with warmth and casual cruelty. "The ghost is trying to drown itself before the storm does." Laughter followed, sharp and painful. Alara flinched, her shoulders hunching as if to ward off physical blows. She kept her eyes fixed on the muddy path, her jaw tight. Don't look up. Don't speak. Don't give them anything more to use against you. Another girl, Mara, stepped forward and deliberately kicked a rock into Alara's path. Alara stumbled, the heavy bucket swinging wildly. A wave of freezing water drenched her front, stealing what little warmth she had left. The shock of it was a gasp, a punch to the gut. "Clumsy thing," Lyra said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Hurry up with that water. The alpha wants his bath, and you stink of river mud and desperation." Desperation. The word hung in the air. It was true. She was desperate. Desperate for a full belly, for a moment of warmth, for a single kind word. Desperate to be seen as more than a piece of dirt to be kicked aside. But that desperation was a weakness, a vulnerability they fed on. She gritted her teeth, the muscles in her jaw screaming in protest. She righted the half-empty bucket and continued her trek, the laughter following her like a pack of hungry hounds. The cold was no longer just a physical sensation. It was an emotional one. It was the ice in Lyra's eyes, the frozen emptiness of her own heart. Inside the sprawling wooden pack house, the warmth was almost a physical blow. The air smelled of roasting meat, wood smoke, and the cloying scent of pine incense. It was a world she served but could never join. She delivered the water to the kitchens, enduring the cook's sour glare, and was immediately sent back out. "The storm's closing in," the grizzled old wolf grumbled, not looking at her. "The traps on the eastern ridge need checking. The patrol is busy with the fortifications. You go." It was a death sentence. The eastern ridge was treacherous even in good weather. In a coming blizzard, it was suicide. But an Omega did not refuse. She could not refuse. To refuse was to be cast out, and to be cast out into this storm was a faster, colder death. So she just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She took the thin cloak that was her only real possession, a small satchel with a stale piece of bread, and stepped back out into the biting wind. This was her worth. Less than a patrol's time. Expendable. The wind howled her name, Or perhaps it was just screaming. The snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in a thick, blinding sheet. The world dissolved into a swirl of white and gray. The path vanished. The trees became ghostly sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up her throat. She fought it down. Panicking was a luxury she couldn't afford. She just had to keep moving, find the traps, and pray she could find her way back. What was happening to me? The question was a foolish one. The same thing that always happened was happening. The world was reminding her of her place. She found the first trap empty, the second too. The cold was becoming unbearable. Her fingers were numb, her face a mask of ice. She felt her energy draining away, the will to take another step faltering. It would be so easy to just lie down, to let the snow cover her, to finally be at peace. No. The word was a spark in the frozen darkness of her mind, a stubborn, foolish flicker of defiance. She would not give Lyra the satisfaction. She would not die so easily. She pushed onward, her world shrinking to the next step and the next. That was when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the symphony of the storm. A low, pained whine, almost lost in the wind's roar. It was a sound of animal suffering. Curiosity, or perhaps a deep-seated empathy for any living thing in pain, pulled her off the barely there path. She pushed through a thicket of snow-laden pines, following the sound. It grew louder, a desperate, guttural sound of agony. And then she saw it. In a small clearing, half buried in the snow, was a wolf. But it was unlike any wolf she had ever seen. It was massive, its frame larger than any pack alpha's, its fur the color of midnight and silver. It was not a full-grown adult, but it was far from a pup. An adolescent, powerful and sleek, but currently brought low. Its front paw was caught in the brutal iron jaws of a hunter's trap. A trap not of their pack's design. It was old, rusted, and cruel. Blood, shockingly dark against the white snow, stained the ground around it. The wolf thrashed, its movements growing weaker, its breaths coming in ragged, steaming puffs. Her heart clenched. All her own misery was forgotten, replaced by a fierce, protective ache for this beautiful creature. The pack taught that all wolves were brothers, but this one felt different, ancient, important. She approached slowly, her hands held out. "Easy," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf stilled, its head lifted, and its eyes met hers. They were not the yellow or brown of a normal wolf. They were a startling, intelligent gray, clouded with pain. It watched her, a low growl rumbling in its chest, a warning. She ignored the growl, her focus entirely on the mangled paw. The metal teeth of the trap had bitten deep into the muscle and bone. It needed to be freed, and soon, or the cold and blood loss would kill it. "I'm going to help," she said, her voice soft but firm. She knelt in the snow beside it, the cold seeping instantly through the thin fabric of her trousers. She didn't care. She unslung her satchel and took off her cloak, draping the thin wool over the wolf's trembling back, a pathetic shield against the raging storm. It flinched at her touch but didn't snap. It watched her, its gaze intense, questioning. She turned her attention to the trap. It was a heavy, spring-loaded mechanism. She put her numb fingers on the cold iron, trying to find the release. Her hands, already raw, screamed in protest as she pulled. The metal wouldn't budge. It was frozen solid and required immense strength. Tears of frustration and cold stung her eyes. "Please," she begged the unforgiving metal. She positioned herself, putting her whole underfed body into the effort, her muscles straining. The wolf whined again, a high, keening sound of pure pain as her movements jostled its leg. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she murmured, her breath catching in a sob. She had to do this. She couldn't leave it here to die. She took a deep, shuddering breath and tried again. She needed more leverage. Bracing her feet, she wrapped her arms around the wolf's leg just above the trap to hold it steady. Her bare hand, its glove long since lost, slipped from the icy limb and pressed directly against its thick, silver-dusted fur. The world exploded. It was not a sound, but a feeling, a silent detonation of heat and light behind her eyes. A searing, white-hot fire shot up her arm, centering on the back of her wrist. She cried out, falling back into the snow, clutching her hand. The pain was excruciating, 1,000 needles of pure flame stabbing into her skin. Through the spots dancing in her vision, she saw the wolf. It had surged to its feet, its injured leg forgotten. The growl in its chest had deepened into something primeval, a sound that vibrated in her very bones. And its eyes, the pain-clouded gray, was gone. In their place were 2 orbs of molten gold, blazing with an impossible light in the dim storm. She scrambled backward, terror a cold spike in her heart. What was happening? What had she done? She looked down at her wrist. Burned onto her pale skin, glowing with a soft, ethereal light of its own, was a mark. An intricate, spiraling symbol like a stylized wolf and a crescent moon, woven together. It pulsed with a gentle warmth that was already spreading through her frozen veins. The giant wolf took a step toward her. It was no longer thrashing or whining. It moved with a deliberate, predatory grace, its golden eyes never leaving her face. The trap, which she had struggled so futilely against, hung loosely from its paw, the iron jaws bent and broken as if they were made of wax. This was no normal wolf. This was something else, something powerful and terrifying. Fear was a scream lodged in her throat. Her instincts, honed by years of abuse, told her to run, to hide, to make herself small and invisible. But she couldn't move. She was pinned by that gaze, by the impossible heat blooming from the mark on her wrist. It stopped just before her, its massive head level with her own. It was so close, she could feel the heat radiating from its body, could see the individual silver hairs that dusted its dark muzzle. It lowered its head and nudged her marked hand with its nose. The touch was not a threat. It was shockingly gentle. A current, warm and alive, passed between them. It felt like recognition. A deep, resonant hum that settled in her soul and calmed the frantic beating of her heart. Confusion warred with her terror. Her mind screamed, "Danger! Monster! Beast!" But her body, her very essence, seemed to lean into its presence. The warmth from the mark was spreading, chasing away the bone-deep chill for the first time in her memory. It felt like coming home to a place she'd never known. The wolf let out a low, soft rumble. It was no longer a growl. It was a sound of possession, a claim. Then the world shifted again. The air around the wolf shimmered, distorting like a heat haze. The massive form began to change, to stretch and reform. Bones cracked and reset with sickening speed. She watched, paralyzed with a terrified awe, as the wolf became a man. He stood where the beast had been, naked in the heart of the blizzard, yet seemingly untouched by the cold. He was impossibly tall, with shoulders as broad as a mountain pass. His body was a tapestry of scars and corded muscle, honed by centuries of battle. His hair was a wild mane of silver and black, dusted with snow. But his face, it was harsh and beautiful, all sharp angles and predatory grace. And his eyes, they were the same molten gold, blazing with an ancient power that made her feel small and utterly transparent. He was the most terrifying and magnificent thing she had ever seen. He looked down at his body, then at his hand, flexing his fingers. A low growl, human now but no less possessive, rumbled in his chest. His golden gaze snapped back to her, pinning her where she sat in the snow. He took a step, and another, until he was looming over her. "You," he said. His voice was deep as thunder, a gravelly sound that vibrated through her. He knelt before her, his movements fluid and certain. He reached out, his large, calloused hand impossibly gentle as he took her arm. He turned her wrist over, his thumb stroking the glowing mark. The touch sent another jolt of that strange, warm energy through her. "Mine," he breathed, the word a vow, an irrefutable fact. Alara could only stare, her mind a whirlwind of disbelief and fear. The Alpha King. Legends told of him. Kaelin, the supreme leader of all packs, a being of immense age and power who ruled from his fortress in the frozen heart of the continent. He was a myth, a bedtime story to frighten pups. But he was real, and he was kneeling in front of her, calling her his. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You are her," he said, his golden eyes searching her face. "The one I have waited for, the one I have searched for." He looked at his leg where a deep, vicious gash still bled sluggishly. "They used silver, a coward's weapon. It weakened me, trapped me in that form." His gaze returned to her. "You touched me. You freed me." He looked at the mark on her skin. "And you claimed me." Claimed him? Her? A worthless Omega? It was impossible. A mistake. A fever dream brought on by the cold. "No," she stammered, trying to pull her hand back. I'm nobody." His grip tightened, not painfully, but with an absolute certainty that allowed no escape. "You are not nobody," he growled, a flicker of anger in his golden eyes, not at her, but at her words. "You are my mate." Before she could process the enormity of that statement, another sound cut through the storm. Voices. Shouting. Familiar voices. "Over here! The tracks lead this way!" Kaelin's head snapped up, a snarl twisting his beautiful, harsh features. He rose to his full, intimidating height, turning to face the sound. He was wounded, unarmed, and naked in a blizzard, yet he radiated an aura of lethal command. Through the swirling snow, figures emerged. Lyra, and with her, Kael, a hulking, brutish beta from the pack who had long made his unwanted attentions known to Alara. They were followed by two of Kael's cronies. They had followed her. They must have hoped to find her frozen corpse. Their triumphant expressions faltered as they saw her, not dead, but alive, and not alone. They stared at the magnificent, terrifying man who stood protectively in front of her. "What is this, ghost?" Lyra sneered, though her voice held a new tremor of uncertainty. "Found yourself a rogue to keep you warm?" Kael's eyes narrowed, his gaze filled with a possessive, ugly jealousy. He took in Kaelin's naked form, the obvious power in his stance, and his gaze fell to Alara, huddled on the ground. He saw the way she tried to hide her wrist. "What's that on your arm?" Kael demanded, taking a step forward. Kalen moved, a blur of motion, placing himself more fully between them and Alara. "She is with me," he stated, his voice a low, deadly warning. "Leave. Now." Kale laughed, a harsh, arrogant sound. "You're in Silvermoon territory, rogue, and you're in no position to give orders." He and his men drew long, wicked hunting knives, their blades gleaming dully in the stormlight. They saw Kalen's wound, the blood still trickling down his leg. They saw a target, not a king. "The girl is ours," Kale snarled. "And whatever trinket she's wearing, I'll take it off her myself." He lunged. Even wounded, Kalen moved with supernatural speed. He sidestepped Kale's clumsy rush, his hand shooting out to grip the man's throat. He lifted the burly beta off his feet with one arm, Kale's legs kicking uselessly. "I will not say it again," Kalen hissed, his golden eyes burning with cold fury. But Lyra was cunning. While the men were focused on Kalen, she circled around. She saw Alara, vulnerable and terrified, an opportunity. With a vicious snarl, she lunged, not at the king, but at the Omega. Alara saw her coming, but was too frozen with shock to react. Lyra's hand, claws extended, swiped for her face. But before they could connect, Kalen threw Kale's choking form into the other two men, sending them sprawling, and spun around. He was still too far away. "No!" he roared. At the last second, Alara threw her arm up to protect her face. Lyra's claws raked across her forearm, but her momentum carried her forward. Her head connected hard with a low-hanging, ice-covered branch. The world fractured into stars and then plunged into blackness. Darkness and pain. A throbbing in her head and a cold that felt like it was inside her bones. Alara drifted in a sea of confused misery. She was being dragged. The snow was rough against her cheek. Voices murmured above her, distorted and ugly. "Got her. What about the rogue?" Kale's voice. "He was too strong, even wounded. He killed Morven. We had to run. But we have her. That's what matters." Lyra's voice, sharp with a hateful triumph. A piece of Alara's consciousness latched onto a new sensation, a cold, aching void. It was centered on her wrist, where the mark had been. The warmth was gone. The vibrant, living connection she had felt to the golden-eyed man was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness that was more painful than any physical wound. It felt like a part of her soul had been carved out. She was thrown onto a rough wooden floor. The impact jarred her back to a more complete and more agonizing awareness. She opened her eyes. She was in a small windowless cabin. A single lantern cast long, dancing shadows. The air was thick with the smell of dust and old fear. Lyra stood over her, a cruel smile on her face. Kale was there, his expression dark and bruised. "Woke up, did you, ghost?" Lyra said. "Your little adventure is over." Alara pushed herself up, her head spinning. She looked at her wrist. The beautiful, glowing mark was now a dull gray, barely visible against her skin. It felt cold to the touch. Dead. The emptiness in her chest intensified into a soul-crushing despair. "What have you done?" she whispered, the words tearing at her throat. "Where is he?" "Your rogue?" Kale sneered. "He's probably bleeding out in the snow. Don't worry about him. You're our prize now." Suddenly, the door to the cabin creaked open. A man stepped inside, and a palpable chill that had nothing to do with the storm entered with him. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in black furs trimmed with crimson. His face was narrow, with thin lips and eyes like chips of obsidian. A quiet, venomous power radiated from him. Lyra and Kael immediately bowed their heads in deference. "Lord Vorlag," Lyra said, her voice dripping with sycophancy. Lord Vorlag's black eyes swept the room, dismissing Lyra and Kael as if they were furniture, and settled on Alara. A slow, reptilian smile spread across his face. He glided forward, his movements unnervingly silent. "So," he hissed, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "This is the one." He knelt down and, without asking, seized her arm. His fingers were cold as death. He examined the faint mark on her wrist, his smile widening. "Incredible," he whispered to himself. "After all these years, Kaylin's fated one, and she is this, a sniveling, worthless Omega." He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Alara tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. "Who are you?" she demanded, a spark of her earlier defiance returning. Vorlag's eyes met hers, and she felt a profound, soul-deep dread. It was like looking into the abyss. "I am the man who will unmake your precious king," he said softly. "I am the leader of the Ember Covenant, and you, little morsel, are the key." He stood, pulling her effortlessly to her feet. He gestured to Kael. "Chain her. Use the silver." Silver. The word echoed Kaylin's own, the coward's weapon. Kael brought a set of heavy, gleaming chains. The moment the cold metal touched her skin, Alara cried out. It wasn't the physical cold. It was a deep, magical agony. The faint mark on her wrist vanished completely, and the hollow ache in her soul became a screaming void. The bond, their fragile, newfound connection, was being smothered. They chained her to the wall, the silver burning her skin. The pain was immense, but it was nothing compared to the desolation she felt inside. The warmth, the hope, the impossible feeling of being seen by those golden eyes. It was all gone, snuffed out. Vorlag watched her, his expression one of clinical fascination. "Did you know," he began, circling her like a predator, "that a soul bond is a conduit? A river of power flows between the two halves. Kaylin has spent centuries alone, his power contained, stagnant. Now it has a place to flow. To you." He leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper in her ear. "The trap was for him. The silver lace steel, designed by my acolytes to drain his strength, to trap him in his lesser form. We knew he was hunting in this territory, but we never dreamed we would find you." He straightened up, his arms spread wide. "This changes everything. I no longer need to face him at his full strength. I can use you. I can drain the bond, siphon his power through you until he is a hollow shell. Or perhaps I will simply use you as bait, draw him here into a trap from which he cannot escape. And once he is dead, I will take his throne, and the magic of the bond will be mine to sever and consume." Despair washed over her, a cold, black tide. She was a tool, a weapon to be used against the one person who had ever looked at her and seen something of worth. Tears streamed down her face, freezing on her cheeks. "He will come for me," she choked out, the words a prayer. Vorlag laughed again. "Oh, I am counting on it, my dear. I am counting on it." He turned and swept out of the cabin, leaving her alone in the darkness with Lyra and Kael standing guard. They jeered at her, mocked her tears, but their words were just meaningless noise compared to the roaring silence in her soul. Days blurred into a haze of pain and despair. They gave her just enough food and water to keep her alive, her body growing weaker, the silver chains a constant, agonizing fire on her skin. The bond was a phantom limb, an ache for something lost that was so profound it felt like dying. She was alone, utterly and completely alone again. The brief moment of warmth in the snow had been a cruel joke, a glimpse of a heaven she was not allowed to enter. She was worthless. Vorlag was right. She was nothing. A hollow vessel for someone else's power, a trap for a king. The despair was so complete, so absolute, that she felt herself starting to fade, her spirit giving up. Let it end. Let it all just end. But then, in the deepest pit of her despair, something flickered. A tiny, faint spark in the void where the bond had been. It was so small she thought she had imagined it. She focused on it, pouring all her remaining will into that single point of sensation. The spark pulsed, faintly, weakly. And then she heard it. Not with her ears, but in the center of her being. A voice, deep as thunder. A rumbling growl of pure, condensed rage. Hold on. Kaelin. It was his voice, impossibly, across the distance, through the smothering effect of the silver. Tears of a different kind now filled her eyes. Tears of desperate, unbelievable hope. She wasn't alone. He was still there. He was fighting for her. I feel you, she thought, directing all her energy, all her soul into the bond. I'm here. I'm sorry. Not your fault, the voice came back, stronger now, clearer. They will pay. Every one of them. I am coming. The promise was not a comfort. It was an inferno. It was the sound of mountains breaking and armies marching. It was the certainty of a reckoning. That tiny spark of connection, fanned by his power and her hope, began to glow. A pinprick of defiant warmth against the burning cold of the silver. It was enough. The ritual began on the third night. Vorlag returned, his obsidian eyes gleaming with anticipation. His acolytes, robed in black and crimson, filed into the cabin, chanting in a low, guttural language. They drew a complex circle of salt and blood on the floor around her. The moon is full, Vorlag announced, his voice ringing with triumph. The bond is at its strongest. Tonight, we will sever the king and drain his heart. He stood before her, holding a black, jagged knife, an obsidian blade that seemed to drink the light from the room. Do not worry, little Omega. Your part in this is almost over. He raised the knife. The chanting grew louder, a frantic, hungry sound. The air grew thick, heavy with dark magic. The pain from the silver chains intensified, and a new, deeper agony began as Vorlag started to carve into the air above her, slicing at the invisible threads of the bond. Alara screamed, a raw, tearing sound. It felt like her soul was being flayed. The tiny spark of her connection with Kaelin flickered violently, threatening to be extinguished forever. She could feel his agony mirroring her own, a distant roar of fury and pain. Kaelin! She screamed in her mind, and the world answered. It began with a tremor, a deep shudder that ran through the very foundations of the earth. The chanting of the acolytes faltered. A low, howling roar echoed from the mountains, a sound of pure, unrestrained power that shattered the night's stillness. Then the wall of the cabin exploded inwards. Wood, snow, and stone erupted into the room. Kaelin stood in the breach, a figure of terrible majesty against the moonlit snow. He was no longer the wounded man from the storm. He was dressed in black armor that seemed forged from shadows and ice. His silver-black hair whipped in the wind he had brought with him, and his eyes. His eyes were no longer molten gold. They were blazing silver fire, burning with a light so intense it was painful to look at. Behind him stood his winter guard, silent, elite warriors in white armor, their own eyes glowing with a faint, predatory light. They poured into the cabin, their movements silent and deadly, and the battle began. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. The winter guard moved like ghosts, their blades reaping a swift and terrible harvest among Vorlag's terrified acolytes. Kaelin had eyes only for two people, for Vorlag, who stood in shocked disbelief, and for Alara, chained and broken against the wall. The silver fire in his eyes intensified into a supernova of rage as he saw her state. "Vorlag!" he roared, his voice shaking the very timbers of the cabin. "You are already dead." He launched himself forward, a force of nature. Vorlag, recovering his composure, met him with a wave of shadow magic, a vortex of darkness that swirled and snapped. Kaelin smashed through it as if it were smoke, his armored fist connecting with Vorlag's jaw with a crack like breaking stone. The usurper flew across the room, crashing into the far wall. But he was powerful. He rose, wiping blood from his thin lips, a black, shadowy aura coalescing around him. "You are too late, King," he hissed. "The bond is already weakening. I have her. I have your heart, right here." He gestured, and the shadows he commanded lashed out like whips, not at Kaelin, but at the silver chains holding Alara. The dark magic amplified the silver's effect, and a new wave of agony, 1,000 times worse than before, tore through her. Kaelin roared in pain, stumbling to one knee, clutching his chest as if his heart were being physically ripped out. The silver fire in his eyes flickered. He was vulnerable. Linked to her, her pain was his pain. Seeing him fall, seeing him hurt because of her, something inside Alara broke. It was not the fragile, hopeless thing that had endured a lifetime of abuse. It was a dam holding back an ocean of pain, rage, and a fierce, burning, protective love for the man on his knees. The man who had called her mine. The man who had crossed a continent, bringing an army with him to answer her silent plea. The dam shattered. A blinding, incandescent light erupted from her. It was not fire. It was not magic as Vorlag knew it. It was pure life, pure soul. It was the light of 1,000 sunrises, the essence of healing and creation, unleashed as a weapon of absolute fury. The light slammed outwards in a silent, unstoppable wave. It struck the silver chains, and they didn't just break. They vaporized. They turned to smoke and memory. The dark magic of the ritual circle evaporated. The shadows Vorlag commanded hissed and dissolved into nothingness. The light washed over Kaelin, and his roar of pain transformed into a surge of power. The wound in his soul was instantly healed, the silver fire in his eyes roaring back to life, brighter and stronger than before. It washed over Lyra and Kael, who had been cowering in a corner. They screamed as the pure, clean light touched them, not burning them, but showing them the black, festering ugliness in their own souls. They collapsed, weeping and broken. Vorlag recoiled, shielding his eyes, his shadow magic useless against this elemental force. "What are you?" he shrieked, his voice filled with a terror that was finally real. "What is this power?" Alara stood. The chains were gone. The pain was gone. The hollow ache was gone, filled to bursting with a power that felt as natural to her as breathing. She was no longer the ghost. She was no longer the worthless Omega. She was a conduit of living light. She met Vorlag's terrified gaze, her own eyes, he would realize too late, now glowing with a soft, white luminescence. "I am his," she said, and her voice did not tremble. It rang with the clarity of a crystal bell and the finality of a death sentence. "And you will not touch him." She raised her hand. The light of the room, the light that was her, converged on her palm, forming a sphere of incandescent energy. She didn't throw it. She simply opened her hand. The light surged forward, striking Vorlag. He did not scream. He did not burn. He simply unraveled. The pure, cleansing light dismantled the dark magic that held his ancient, corrupt form together. For a single, silent moment, he was a man of ash and shadow. And then the wind from the broken wall swept him away into the night. Silence. The battle was over. The Winter Guard stood motionless among the fallen acolytes. Lyra and Kael sobbed on the floor. And Kalen was rising to his feet, his silver eyes fixed on her, filled with an emotion she had never seen before. Awe, reverence, and a love so profound it stole her breath. He walked toward her, his heavy, armored footsteps the only sound in the ruined cabin. He didn't stop until he was standing before her, the sheer size of him eclipsing the world. She thought he would speak, would demand answers, would question the impossible power she had just unleashed. He did none of those things. He simply reached out and pulled her into his arms. His metal-clad embrace should have been cold and hard, but it was the safest, warmest place she had ever been. He buried his face in her hair, his whole body trembling with the aftershocks of the battle, of the fear he had felt for her. One hand cradled the back of her head, the other pressed against her lower back, holding her to him as if he might fuse their very atoms together. "I have you," he murmured, his voice thick with raw, ragged emotion. It wasn't a statement of possession now, but one of immense, soul-deep relief. "You're safe. I have you." She melted against him, her newfound strength giving way to the simple, overwhelming need to be held. She wrapped her arms around his broad waist, her cheek pressed against the cold, hard plate of his chest armor. She could feel the frantic, powerful beat of his heart beneath it. Tears, this time of relief and homecoming, streamed down her face. He held her for a long time, until the world stopped spinning, until the silence was no longer heavy with death, but with a quiet, sacred peace. Finally, he pulled back just enough to look at her. He reached up, his gauntleted thumb brushing away her tears with an impossible gentleness. "You saved me," he said softly, his silver eyes searching hers. "You came for me," she whispered back. "I felt you. You didn't give up." "Never," he vowed, his voice a guttural promise. "Not in 1,000 lifetimes." He took her hand, the one that had borne the mark, and brought it to his lips. He kissed her wrist, right over the place where the symbol had been. As his lips touched her skin, the mark flared back to life. Not a dull gray, not a soft white, but a brilliant, warm gold, brighter and more intricate than before. It pulsed with a living light, a testament to what they had survived. But this time, something else happened. As her mark blazed, Kalen let out a sharp hiss. He released her hand and pressed his own against his chest, over his heart. A golden light shone through the gaps in his black armor. He unclasped the breastplate, letting it fall to the floor with a heavy clang. There, burned onto his skin directly over his heart, was a matching symbol. The wolf and the moon, intertwined, glowing with the same vibrant golden light as the mark on her wrist. It pulsed in time with hers, a silent, rhythmic declaration. He stared down at it, then looked back at her, his expression one of utter wonder. "You have marked me," he breathed. "Ilara, you have claimed me." She looked from the mark on her hand to the one on his chest. He was hers as much as she was his. Not a possession, but a completion. Two halves of a single soul, finally reunited. She reached out, her fingers tracing the glowing symbol on his warm skin. "My king," she whispered. A slow smile spread across his harsh, beautiful face. It was like watching the sunrise after a long, dark winter. It transformed him. "My queen," he corrected softly. He dealt with the aftermath swiftly. Lyra and Kael, broken by the light, were handed over to the shamed elders of the Silver Moon Pack who had arrived in the wake of Kalen's army. Their judgment would be harsh, but just. The pack itself was placed under the direct stewardship of one of Kalen's most trusted commanders until its honor could be restored. But Ilara saw none of that. Kalen wrapped her in his own massive, fur-lined cloak, lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, and carried her from the ruins of her old life. He never put her down, carrying her through the snow to where his own people had made camp. They traveled for days, leaving the tarnished lands of the Silver Moon Pack far behind. They journeyed into the heart of the northern mountains, to Kalen's own kingdom. His fortress, Icefire Keep, was not a dark and grim place, but a breathtaking structure of white stone and blue ice carved into the side of the continent's largest mountain. It glittered under the winter sun, strong and beautiful and eternal. When they arrived, the entire court was assembled in the great hall, a vast cavern of a room with a ceiling that glittered with veins of raw crystal. Hundreds of warriors, nobles, and elders, the most powerful wolves on the continent, stood in silence, their eyes wide with curiosity and apprehension. Kalen walked through them, still carrying her, his stride proud and certain. He did not stop until he reached the twin thrones of carved obsidian and weirwood that sat on a raised dais. He gently set her down on her feet before them, but kept a protective arm around her waist. He turned to face his people. His voice, which had been so gentle with her, now boomed with the absolute authority of a king. "You have wondered for centuries why I remained alone," he declared, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "You feared our line would end. You feared my power had no anchor. Your fears are now laid to rest." He took her hand and raised it high, the golden mark on her wrist blazing for all to see. "Behold," he commanded, "Ilara, my mate, my heart, the soul of my soul. She who holds the light of creation in her hands. She is your queen." A collective gasp went through the hall. Then, as one, from the mightiest warrior to the oldest elder, they dropped to one knee. The sound was a soft thunder of allegiance, of acceptance. Ilara looked out at the sea of kneeling figures, her heart swelling with an emotion she couldn't name. These powerful, proud people were kneeling to her. The ghost. The nobody. She looked at Kaelin, and the profound, unwavering love in his golden eyes gave her strength. Later, they stood on a high balcony overlooking his kingdom. The endless expanse of snow-covered peaks and dark, ancient forests spread out below them. The air was cold and clean, smelling of pine and winter storms. She was wrapped in his arms, her back pressed against his chest, his warmth a permanent shield against the chill. For the first time in her life, she did not feel the cold. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly, his lips brushing against her hair. She thought for a moment. Afraid of the power that now hummed beneath her skin? Afraid of being a queen to these formidable people? Afraid of the immensity of the life that now stretched before her? "No," she answered, her voice quiet but sure. She leaned her head back against his shoulder, looking up at his strong jawline. "With you, I'm not afraid of anything." He tightened his embrace, a low, contented rumble in his chest. "Good," he murmured, "because we are only just beginning." She looked out at the vast, wild beauty of her new home. It was not just a kingdom. It was a promise, a future. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer worthless. She was seen. She was cherished. She was loved. She was home.